Hey guys, welcome to the WTF Story Channel, the home of true crime and real life stories. Now, from your very own seasoned raconteur, here is your weekly instalment of an urban campfire story, an old and frightening folklore tale where no one really knows if it happened, if it is true, and what darkness really lies behind each disturbing urban legend. Yes, these urban legends, those unsubstantiated stories of terror that allow us to use our imaginations to fill in increasingly horrifying details with each retelling. Those horrifying folklore tales that have been told around the campfire for centuries and are enshrouded in darkness, mystique and a pervading atmosphere of evil, and ones that no one can really testify as to their actual truth. So here is this week's urban campfire tale, and I will let you make your mind up as to whether there is any truth behind it. Now, do you believe in witches? Well, let's see. The Bell Witch, or the Bell Witch haunting, is a well-known legend from southern United States urban folklore and is centered on the 19th century Bell family of northwest Robertson County, Adams, Tennessee. The witch remains a part of American folklore even to this very day. Now, this is where Farmer John Bell Sr. resided with his family along the Red River in an area near the town of Adams. And even 10 years before he became president, Andrew Jackson had heard the story of the Bell Witch that had spread from the town of Adams, Tennessee, about this ghostly witch that was supposedly haunting the Bell family. And he'd even attended to investigate himself in 1819. It is said that as Jackson and his entourage had entered the Bell property, his horse-drawn wagon suddenly stopped in its tracks, and despite his best efforts, the wheels would simply not churn, they would not turn, and the horses couldn't pull the wagon any closer to the house, as something evil, a presence, had halted their advance. And with that, Jackson left sharpish, and he never returned to the Bell property. Jackson later declared that it was a doing of the witch, and according to a legend, a disembodied voice had warned him at that time, "All right, General, let the wagon move on, I will see you again tonight." And he did, pretty sharpish, never to return again. So, it was according to legend from 1817 to 1821 that his family, the Bell family in the local area, came under regular attack by a mostly invisible entity, an evil force, a poltergeist witch that was able to speak, was able to affect the environment physically, and was able to cross distances at superhuman speed, whilst also shapeshifting. In 1894, newspaper editor Martin Ingram published his authenticated history of the Bell Witch, and this book is widely regarded as the first full-length record of the legend, and now is the primary source for subsequent recollections and as a foundation for the Bell Witch history. And as such, some of the people recorded and within the work of the book were known historical personalities to add to its authentication. However, in modern times, some skeptics have regarded Ingram's efforts as a work of historical fiction or even downright fraud, whereas other researchers have considered Ingram's work just folklore study and a depiction of what people thought at the material time about witches, and therefore an accurate reflection of belief in the region during the 19th century, but perhaps not reality. But who knows? While not a fundamental element of the original recorded legend, the Bell Witch Cave in the 20th century became a source of continuing interest, fear, belief, and a well talked about story for generations upon generations. The history of the Bell Witch has been the subject of contemporary artistic interpretations, such as in film and in music, and the legend has expanded its reach beyond the regional confines of the southern United States. There were many strange sightings. For example, the physical activity from this witch poltergeist spirit centered on the farmer John Bell's youngest daughter called Betsy, and her father John and Kate expressed particular displeasure when Betsy became engaged to a local named Joshua Gardner. So the haunting began sometime in 1817 when John Bell witnessed the apparition and spirit of a strange and malevolent creature resembling a dog with the head of a rabbit loitering near his farm in the cornfields, and Bell fired at the animal, but it scuttled away and disappeared into the cornfield. Then a short while later, John's son, Drew Bell, had approached an unknown bird that was perched on a fence, and who then flew off when he got near to it, but he said it was of extraordinary size, according to Bell. Then the daughter Betsy observed a girl in a green dress who was swinging from the limb of an oak tree, but again she soon disappeared too. Then there was Dean, who was a slave belonging to the Bell family, who reported being followed by a large black dog on evenings when he visited his wife. And again, upon approaching the dog, he said the dog simply vanished. Then the activity moved into the Bell household, with knocking heard along the door and the walls regularly, and with the family hearing sounds of gnawing on the beds, invisible dogs fighting, and chains clanking and clinking along the floor. It was around this time that John Bell was started experiencing paralysis in his mouth, and the strange and disturbing phenomena grew in intensity, as sheets were also suddenly pulled from the beds when the children slept at night. There was a lot going on in the Bell household. Then the entity pulled their hair and scratched the children, with particular emphasis on Betsy, who was slapped, pinched and stuck with pins in demented onslaughts and attacks by this entity. The Bells quickly turned to family friend James Johnson for help, and he came to live with them to discover what was going on. And one day, after retiring for the evening at the Bell home, Johnson was awakened that night by the same phenomena and the same occurrences that the Bells had been experiencing. That morning, James Johnson told John Bell it was a spirit just like in the Bible, and soon word of the haunting spread, with some travelling great distances to see the witch. It was around this time that the apparition began to speak out loud and was asked, "Who are you and what do you want?" And the voice answered feebly, "I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but have been disturbed." Never mess around with the spirit. That is day one rule of spirit school. Don't mess with spirits. Anyway, the spirit stated why it had appeared and said its origins were linked to the disturbance of a Native American burial mound located on the property. And then this sent the family on an unproductive search for further information. The entity witch was also well acquainted with biblical texts and appeared to enjoy religious arguments with the family when they attempted to communicate with it, and the witch also shared gossip about activities in other households, and at the time also left for brief moments to visit other homes too after one of their discussions. John Johnson, the son of James, then devised a test for the witch, something that no one outside his family would know, asking the entity what his Dutch step-grandmother in North Carolina would say to the slaves if she thought they did something wrong. The witch replied with his grandmother's accent, "What has happened now?" This started to become even more sinister than it already was. In another account, an Englishman stopped to visit and offered to investigate the goings-on. And upon remarking on his family overseas, the witch suddenly began to mimic his English parents. This witch had skills. The Englishman quickly left that morning, and he then later wrote to the Bell family that the entity had then visited his family in England, and he also apologised for his initial scepticism in not believing them about the Bell witch. However, poor farmer John Bell would not receive the same treatment, and the witch would call him Old Jack and constantly stated her intention to kill him, and signalled this through curses, threats and then the afflictions on his body. Finally, in December 1820, John suddenly slipped into a coma, and the following day, on December the 20th, he died quietly at home. The witch had claimed John Bell's life by poisoning him. And then, as everyone was mourning his death, the evil witch would interrupt their dirges and mourning by singing drinking songs to goad them and rub salt into their wounds. In 1821, as a result of the witch's actions, Betsy Bell called off her engagement to Joshua Gardner, and the witch then told the family that it was going to leave, but return in 7 years, in 1828, to see what was happening, and it did, and then it quickly left again. So just who was the Bell Witch? And was it just witchery and the same witches who afflicted people in the past centuries and the darker ages? Or was this some kind of evil fiend, a demon who was practicing sorcery for selfish enjoyment? Or was it just sorcery, mesmerism, or an evil spirit sent from hell? No one really knows for sure. Now, several theories have emerged over the years in an attempt to explain the Bell Witch hauntings, with some believing that she was a local school teacher who was so in love with Betsy Bell and then somehow fabricated the eerie phenomena so the girl would leave her fiancé and be with her instead. Another version of the legend states that the Bell Witch was a spirit that had been disturbed when the family built their farm on Native American burial ground, and she was exacting revenge. Then another theory says that the Bell family once asked the ghost who she was, and she responded that she was the witch of Cape Bat, who was an eccentric neighbour who was known for making up stories for attention. As such, and in Ingram's book An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, he published the witch's name as Kate, after the entity had claimed at one point to be Old Kate Bat's Witch, and continued to respond favourably to that name thereafter. Then more plausible rationale has been applied to John Bell's death, and even modern day scientists think John Bell was slowly poisoned with arsenic, and this was perhaps by one of the enslaved workers, but so the mystery continues. Whilst it is impossible to know the true nature of the unexplainable events that terrorised the Bell family and the other locals in the 1800s, the sinister legend of the Bell Witch still persists as America's greatest ghost story. From 1817 to 1820, the Bell Witch remained a permanent fixture at the Bell Farm, and according to the historic Bell Witch Cave, the spirit would supposedly speak with the Bell family and visitors from around the country about the past and the future, and she was especially well versed in the Bible. Over the years, every aspect of the Bell Witch legend are doubted by many, and after all, the story is essentially a folk tale passed down through the generations, though there are newspaper articles from the 1850s that do also mention the witch. But the real question is, do you think that the witch was real? Do you believe in these folklore stories? Would you visit the Bell Witch farm and stay a night there? Do you think President Andrew Jackson had simply made his account up? Do you believe in witches? Do you believe in the truth of the Bell Witch? Thanks for watching, guys. Off to get a cup of tea. See you back in a bit.